Welcome to Calling All Voices, brought to you by the Dementia Action Alliance and the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease. My name is Karen Love, and I am the CEO of the Dementia Action Alliance. In this podcast, you will hear from people living with dementia from the Black and the LGBTQ+ communities. They'll share stories about how resilience and persistence can help people to continue to live meaningful lives, even with the diagnosis of dementia. And you'll hear participants discuss why it's important that we call all voices to share their experiences.
Well, welcome to Calling All Voices. This is a podcast that asks people who are living with dementia to use their voice and share their stories. In this particular series, Calling All Voices has asked those who are living with dementia and who are part of the LGBTQ+ community to speak out as well. And the reason that we're doing this is a couple of reasons. Research is just now beginning to show that gender and sexual minorities are at an increased risk for cognitive decline. And age is a risk factor, certainly, for dementia, but being old, contrary to what a lot of people believe about dementia, being old does not necessarily dementia make, And LGBTQ+ people who are living with dementia face unique challenges to care. According to the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, studies have shown that social isolation is associated with a 50% increase risk of dementia, 50% increased risk. And if you identify as LGBTQ+, you are twice as likely to live alone as you get older. Social networks decrease over time, and you're much less likely to have kids to care for you as you age. So, what's a girl or boy or non-binary person to do to find the support that they need? Well, we're going to find that out today. I'm your host, Chris Cavell, and in today's episode, we're going to talk to a couple who will share their story of how they found and created support while living with dementia. They found support that they needed, and they are Meredith Hunt and Melissa Hamkins. I'm very excited to talk with you guys again today. Thanks so much for joining me on this podcast.
Great.
Thank you. Now, I'm just going to say a couple things about your background. Melissa and Meredith, you've been together for 27 years now?
28 as of last week.
28 as of last week. Well, congratulations. That's fantastic. I love that. And you've been advocating.
We're not sure that exact day.
What's that?
So it might even be today. We're not quite sure the exact day.
Oh, do you celebrate the day that you met or the day that
our first date?
Your first date. Okay. My wife often reminds me of, or often forgets and asks, when did we get married? Because in her mind, our anniversary is the day that we met, so yeah.
Well, I want credit for all that time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's good.
Yeah, and we had to go through jumping enough things to get acknowledgement that we're a couple, with all the different
different things. Yeah, so you want to keep track of those quality years together, for sure. And actually, Melissa, that brings up a good point. You guys have fought for a number of years for LGBTQ rights, including marriage equality, since really the beginning, from the 1990s, right? And you've been living together and having a life together for a number of years. I won't say exactly where you live, but you have a fantastic 200-year-old homestead in New England, which you care for together. Now, Melissa, you were diagnosed a couple of years ago now, about 4 years ago, with mild cognitive impairment, and it was recently confirmed to be Alzheimer's disease. Is that right?
She was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, but in about 6 months it became Alzheimer's, and that was 3.5 years ago.
Melissa, Would you tell us a little bit about your journey with dementia? When and how did you realize that something had changed? Tell us a little bit about that. What happened at work?
Well, I worked as a chemical engineer for a company that we did mostly civil type work, wastewater treatments, that kind of place, that kind of things. And I had been with them for a long time. And over the period of time, or, part of what was happening is, as I was getting older and going through menopause, I started having less memory ability, and I assumed that was just, going through menopause, and then it would come back and whatnot. But that didn't really happen to me. So part of what one of the ways that I was kind of pushed in a nice way to get help was from my company. They had, you get your annual reviews and stuff. And so it was during one of those that they gave me like this absolutely horrible review. Okay. And purposely done to say, hey, something's happening here. You guys got to go do something about it. No.
She'd been there for 20 years and had never had a bad review in 20 years.
Yeah. And what was really neat about what my company did is that they knew that we were going on this trip to Iceland, and they just stretched out to when my review was going to be until after I got back, before they did, before they started making things, well, not making things, before acknowledging that something was wrong.
And the review is filled with kind of things of her taking too long on projects, needing to double check things. Her ability to write memos and stuff was not good. And these were not things that are normal for Melissa.
Yeah.
I had been seeing signs for a while, but I was putting it up to menopause. But then when this review came back and I read it, I'm like, that's not menopause. There's more going on here. So I got her to her primary care doc, and then we got a neuropsych evaluation and an MRI. It's our neurologist, and there clearly was some deficiencies going on and a little bit of atrophy of the brain on the MRI.
Okay. So and Meredith, I know that you have a little bit of experience in the medical field. You are a women's health nurse practitioner.
Yeah.
Nurse practitioner in women's health. So you noticed some of the changes in her. And as you said, you kind of chalked it up to menopause, right? I think it's interesting, from hearing from other people who are living with dementia, often the process, the diagnostic experience is kind of long, because there's so many different variables, so many different things it could be. So you went to your primary care physician, and then did the primary care physician, was it someone that you had a relationship with? Was it somebody that knew you guys well? Was there an issue with you being a couple and seeing a doctor?
No, not at all. She's been our doctor for a while. And in fact, our doctor prior to that was a lesbian, and this woman replaced her. So, she had plenty of patients that were lesbians that had been seeing the prior doctor. So she was cool. She's been nothing but respectful of our relationship.
So from the primary care physician, what was the next step after that? They referred you to someone else?
So, yeah, the first thing she did is did a whole bunch of tests to just make sure it wasn't something like Lyme disease or vitamin deficiencies, all of that. Getting the neuropsych eval was probably one of the hardest things, because the waiting list to get those can be like 6 months or more. And in Melissa's situation, they kind of put her on a 3-month probation. So I was like, I need an answer within 3 months. So this is where being in the healthcare field helped a little, but I did pull a few strings and got her an evaluation. And also the appointment with the neurologist, and sort of the combining of the two is how they made the diagnosis.
And so you were noticing that, Meredith, she was working late or bringing things home. Work was noticing, hey, some of these calculations are incorrect, or you've done this same task a couple of times. And so when they finally gave you the review, it was definitely not one that you've experienced before. It was not a great review.
No, it wasn't. But it was also one that they, I mean, it was a bad review, and it probably was, it was appropriately bad. But they also were pushing me to go and figure out something, that there's something's wrong here. But they were doing it by giving me a really bad review.
And a big push.
And a big, yeah.
That was their way of saying, we notice some things are going on. Meredith at home is saying, hey, I'm noticing this, this, and this. And they're saying, I'm writing down on this review all these things that we're noticing. You need to go get some help. Yeah.
But they were also incredibly wonderful when we did start working on figuring out what was going on. And it was clear there was something going on. And we went to them, and it was all right close around Christmas and everything, and trying to get appointments and everything during that time. And we needed to get a second opinion. And what they did is they just said, okay, you just need to have this many hours a week on your pay, on your timesheet. And we can stretch out your benefits. So they managed to stretch out our benefits for like 2 more months. So that we could get everything arranged, and thank God her job had long-term disability, and they were able to help us get all that. So by the time she left, we had our ducks in order.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounded like too, because
I mean, basically what they did is they gave me this really bad review, but more to, kind of a kick in the butt. You got to do something, something's happening here. Okay. But after that, the company was very good about doing everything we could to do, to make things,
To help us.
Yeah, to help us.
That's fantastic. And that's a credit to you, Melissa. Actually, for you to be working with this company for the number of years that you have, 20 years or so, and them being a support to you now, that's to your credit. That's a wonderful thing. So you have work supporting you, urging you to get a diagnosis or to see what the heck is going on. And then once that diagnosis has been made, them supporting you and having these things in place to help you. That's wonderful. Tell me a little bit, Meredith, what other supports did you have? You two live together on this wonderful homestead. What about your neighbors? Have your neighbors been supportive in this journey?
They have now. I mean, initially it was kind of, it was just the two of us trying to figure this all out. But we talked about it, and we were like, do you want people to know or not people to know? And Melissa has been very open and out about it. And so we shared with like our neighbors and our friends. And they've been great. We have neighbors on both sides of us that have tractors, and they have been extremely helpful with that, of like downing trees and dragging them over for us so that we can cut them up for firewood. I know we live on a farm. These are the things we do.
I'm going to show my support by driving my tractor.
I am. And just, little things. And like, if we had to go to doctor's appointments, coming in, taking care of putting the chickens away or something like that. And one of the things that with friends now is just like socializing. It was really hard as this all happened. And one of the things that we did after her diagnosis, we planned all these wonderful trips that we were going to take, and then COVID hit. And the complete isolation, and plus me being in the healthcare field, that was an added stress going on too. So that was hard, and our friends were helpful with that, trying to, creating little pods of people that we could interact with and such. But for a person with Alzheimer's to have that isolation with COVID has been really hard. And I've heard that from many people.
Yeah. COVID has definitely not been helpful. And certainly in terms of people feeling alone, it's one thing to have social supports, but to feel so alone, COVID, and not being able to touch people or reach out,
Right.
that can be certainly a challenge.
One of the things that we did kind of in that vein is, we had lost our last dog. And so we got a new dog along with that. And she's been really great for me to, I can go out skiing and, she's running around with me, and it's a little bit more companionship when Meredith's off working and things like that, because, there's, when you're trying to isolate, you need something.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great point. Having a four-legged friend, whether it's a dog or a cat, is fantastic. I have found, because I have a dog, Dolly Parton is our dog. There's no judgment. I can talk to her all day, and she's a fantastic listener. Do you find that, Melissa? Yeah.
As long as she throws the Frisbee, that's all she cares.
That's right. As long as I can throw a Frisbee, she's really great for me.
Yeah. And actually, I would think too, with what you said too about having that presence with Meredith being at work and having that presence there to talk to, but also with COVID not being able to physically touch people, to have a dog that you could feel and feel their warmth and feel the softness of their fur and just have that physical tactile touch is huge.
Therapy is a big thing with dementia patients.
What sort of support, now that you've gotten the diagnosis, what was the next step? We were like, I need to get support from others who are living with this so I can better understand it. Tell me about that next step in your journey.
I think the next step in the journey really was getting some professional help, just trying to figure out what all this is all about.
For me, it became a crash course in learning legal stuff. We fortunately had a lawyer friend who is an elder care lawyer. So we went to see him, and he helped us set up wills and power of attorneys and medical proxies, a trust, all kinds of things like that, and gave us advice. And then, as I said, figuring out the long-term disability and all this paperwork and forms for that. And the process for Social Security disability, that's a pain in the ass, excuse me. But for me, one of the things that I did, I joined some Facebook groups because of COVID, couldn't go to like meetings and things like that. So I joined some Facebook groups, and I got involved with one that was specific for female partners or spouses. And it's great because we all share information and, like, okay, this is what you need to do and stuff like that. So that first year, you're just like a sponge. I mean, you're in shock and you're a sponge and you're just trying to figure it all out. And
were there challenges for you as a lesbian or a lesbian couple on the Facebook group?
Yeah. Because it was never like blatant discrimination. It just was always the assumption that your partner wasn't your husband, or a male partner. And so there was a lot of discussion that when like people would make, if I said something, they'd say, well, your husband, whatever. And I'm like, no, I use she. But the other thing that I found myself doing is, watching for other people that had female partners. And then we all kind of connected with each other. And we ended up creating a second group, sort of an offshoot for LGBT plus spouses with early onset Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. And that's been great. I've got friends now that are in Alaska, Colorado, all over the place. And we have once a month Zoom meetings we have an hour that's for the caregivers and then another hour that's the caregivers and the spouses, so that everybody can, Melissa can talk with other people that are going through this as well.
Mm-hmm. So you can meet, Melissa, other people who are living with dementia who also have a partner who is a woman.
Yes.
Tell me why that's important to you, because some people perhaps who are, in a traditional relationship might not really see why that's as important. Tell me why that's important to you.
Well, part of it is our identity.
Right. It's men and women interact with each other differently than women and women and men and men. And so it's easier in some ways because we're dealing with the same sort of thing going through this. When it's a man and a woman that are dealing with this, there's different things that they have to deal with than what we do because of the interactions that we need to have. I don't know, I'm not explaining this well.
It's nice having people that can relate to what your lifestyle is, can relate to your life experiences. Some of what Melissa is saying, to be a little bit crude, like one of the things that I hear from the women in the regular group is they talk about how their partners are peeing all over the house and stuff like that, which is kind of a male thing, but not dealing with that with females. So it's just, different kind of behaviors that you're seeing with females versus males with this disease. But just for me, it's validation of who we are. We are a lesbian couple. That's part of who we are. It's not all that we are, but it's nice to be able to talk with other people that are also in homosexual relationships.
Right. I think it just hearing you guys talk a little bit too, it reminds me of just kind of the experience of just, for me, coming out. It was really important for me to find other people who were gay. Honestly, I didn't know anybody who was gay. Now I'm like, think back, I'm like, oh yeah, that person was gay. Oh, that person was gay. So
that teacher was. That's
right. So I think my thought is that perhaps for people who have been recently diagnosed, and as you said, Meredith, people are like, when this first came out, you guys are just sucking up information like a sponge. Like, what does this mean? What's this all about? How do I live with this part of who I am? But it's all very kind of familiar. It's like, it's nice to be able to find people who can relate to who you are. And dementia is just a part of who you are, Melissa, but so is being a lesbian. That's a part of who you are. So being able to find other people who are living with dementia and who are also lesbians, there must be some, I would think, a great amount of comfort there, that you're like, okay.
There's some of that. I mean, some of it is it's easier a lot of times to interact with women than it is with men. I mean, not always, but it's, you know what I mean? There's just a different.
For me, it's more of a I don't have to explain my lifestyle. I don't have to explain things where, and when we just get it and get the issues of two women living together or two men living together. That I'm looking for support for as a caregiver of someone with dementia. And while I have been in the past, I'm not very much an activist for the gay community, that's not what I'm doing. When I'm looking for support, I'm just looking for support. And it's just easier if I'm working with other people who are LGBTQ, who get it, and I don't have to explain, and I don't have to be an educator on that front.
I think that's a great point, actually, Meredith, because I think what I'm hearing you say is I need to focus on one thing here. I need to focus on dementia, learning about dementia. How best can I be a partner to my partner in this regard? And I think that's a good point, having to not have to worry about or think about, okay, now I need to talk about this other part of who I am. Let's just keep that aside. I think that's a very good point. And that's
But I do want to make sure that I'm also saying that, the original group I was in, and I am still a member of that group, and I still do stuff in that. I have gotten a lot from those women as well. So it's not, but it's just a little something extra that I can get having a separate group that's LGBTQ plus.
Yeah. Just a different support.
Yeah.
Like the other group can't give because they don't have the experience of being part of the LGBT community. Right.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you have, and again, talking about support today. So you've created this Facebook group to find, or in this other group, you found kind of piecemeal these other people who also.
Oh yeah, we're like little spies. With a couple of us that sort of were the founders, and like, did you see her post? I think she's part of the family too. And we would send them little private messages just saying, notice you mentioned, just so you know, there are some other lesbians, and we have this little side group.
So you've put that together for yourselves. You've got your dog, Melissa, which is a great to have an animal companion. Your neighbors,
22 chickens and 2 cats.
well, yes, 22 chickens and a couple of cats. That's good. And your neighbors are supportive. Have they always been supportive of you two?
Yeah.
Yeah, they
When we moved into Maine, and we were part of the initial groups that were doing things to get LGBT people acknowledged, and going through that aspect of it. And so that's always been part of what we've had in our community here, into a certain way.
But yes, we've been involved in many campaigns, in the Heart and Mind campaign, but I will say that, Melissa and I are not in your face about it. We just are who we are, and we live our life, and that's how our neighbors see us. The funny story, I think I told you this one before, of our neighbors. So when we first moved here, their kids were very young. And we got to know them, and they would come play on our farm, and, we share a field, and we let them fly their kites in our field and things like that. And one day they were on their way to church, and there was something on the radio about gay people. And one of the kids asked their mom, what are gay people? And so she said, well, you know how mommy and daddy love each other? Well, sometimes two women love each other like that, and sometimes two men love each other like that. And the kid said, oh, like Meredith and Melissa? And she said, yes. And they're like, okay. And then they just went on.
That's interesting to hear too, because I feel like with dementia, and I mentioned this in the beginning of the podcast, that there's sometimes some misunderstanding about what it is, what is dementia? What does it mean? What does it mean to live with dementia? And oftentimes I think a lot of people have this picture in their head that dementia means you're old and you're the end stage, you're at the end. And I think when people get the diagnosis, there's this feeling like this is the end. And I think by your example, you're sharing your story and sharing with your neighbors. As you said earlier, you made the decision to talk to your neighbors and say, this is where we are in our life, and this is what's happening, and we are living with dementia. That hopefully you're helping to kind of reframe that picture as well.
And that's a key word. We're living with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's, yes, we know what's coming, but right now, I mean, we're 3.5 years into this. Melissa is still able to drive a car locally. She takes care of the farm while I'm at work. She's capable of doing many things.
Mhm.
It's not that image that people have of the person in the wheelchair drooling and not knowing, yeah, that may be way, way down the road, but it's many years from now.
Yeah.
Before you get to that. And there's still time to live now and do things.
I want to ask Meredith if you could give a little bit of insight on how organizations, and since you work as a nurse practitioner, how medical communities, medical settings can be more supportive and accessible for LGBTQ plus people, because going to the doctor and getting diagnosed early is important in determining, do you have dementia? So how can medical settings be more supportive and accessible to members of the community?
Well, the first thing I think about is when someone walks into the waiting room, and just in my office, we have LGBTQ inclusive flags, stickers in there. Prior to COVID, we had magazines that were, but now with COVID, you can't have anything in your waiting room. So on our health histories, we ask questions about pronouns. We ask questions about partners, and we're just very upfront and about it and accepting. And so I think that's a big thing is just being accepting and training your support staff to be, because it starts right with the front desk receptionist, being understanding. One of the things that I do is I provide a lot of gender affirming hormone therapy for transgendered people.
Oh, okay.
And so I made a real point in my office. On my name tag, I have pronouns on it. To just, like, it's not that I necessarily have to explain it, but for somebody in that community to see that I get it, that about putting what my pronouns are, goes a long way. It's very subtle things, but those very subtle things, I know for myself, when I walk into an office, if I see a rainbow flag or an inclusive flag, I'm like, okay, these people get it. I feel more comfortable in this office.
But I want to ask just this one last question. What advice would you give to others about finding support and building support?
One of the things that I would put forth is to just be open as to what's going on, so that people around you know what's going on or what the issue is, or so that you're still part of the whole group with everything, but people give you acknowledgement of things that, oh God, you told me that 4 times already. They just don't do that to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's if you're open to what, in some ways, it's the same as being out, as lesbians. Okay, if people know that, then they adjust to what the pronouns are and whatever you have that you need to be more comfortable with. In the same way, you're giving the same information or same.
And that would be our dog.
You wanted to jump in and put an exclamation point on that. Very good point.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I would piggyback on that, is being open and honest about what's going on. as I said, we made the decision early on not to hide. And I know many people who do. They're, it's a matter of pride and things that they don't want people to know. But I'm like, this is real. This is what's happening to us. And also learning to ask for help. That's been hard in some ways for me to say, you know what, I can't do it all. I can't do it all by myself. And ask for help, and us and look for resources that are out there. There are a lot of resources, and finding, for me, talking to other people that have gone through it, that are further along in the process, able to give me help on that.
Yeah, and it's also, letting your neighbors know what's going on. And that's a thing that allows me to be more independent, because I know that if I go to the neighbors and I'm, maybe not confused, yeah, if I'm confused or whatever, that they will bring me back here, because they know that that's,
And it's reassuring for me too, because I have talked with my neighbors about, Melissa and I have certain rules on the farm of what she can do and can't do when I'm not here. Like, she's not allowed to use a chainsaw when I'm not here, or
which is true for her too.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, but any cutting, anything that we could hurt ourselves with.
Yeah. You could use a hacksaw.
Right. So like she was out working on some wood one day when I wasn't there, and my neighbor told me later, she's like, I just want you to know, Melissa was using the bow saw. She wasn't using the chainsaw to cut up that wood. Like, okay, good, thanks. So they kind of keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what you both have just said here, I think, is hugely important for anybody who is listening to understand, whether they are LGBTQ identified or not, is the the willingness and the ability to step out, to speak out, and say with courage, because it's hard. People want to be independent, and to admit, hey, I need help, or hey, this is what's going on with me, and being vulnerable is huge. And I think, in a way, being a part of the LGBTQ plus community and deciding years ago, like you guys did, to be, this is me, I am who I am, and I'm not afraid to say so, is kind of a positive in your column to help perhaps deal with this diagnosis. So I think sharing that, the ability to be courageous and say, this is what I'm going through, is a really important step. So I'm really glad that you said that. I think in talking to so many people through the, with the interviewing people for this podcast, that's the underlying theme, I think, so often, over and over, whether, again, people are LGBTQ identified or not, people who are living with dementia are speaking out courageously and sharing who they are. And that allows other people to then be a support to them, because they know this is what's happening. So I really want to thank you guys for sharing your story today. And I hope that people who have been listening to it find it helpful. There's so many ways to find support online, through your neighbors, through your four-legged friends, and getting legal help, because that's certainly a big part of it that many people, myself included, we all know. Yeah, that's a big thing. So thank you all so much for joining me, and I hope we can talk again.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Calling All Voices. If you're interested in learning more, please see the episode notes for this podcast. In the episode notes, you can find more information about Calling All Voices and the work of the Dementia Action Alliance and the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease. The creation of this podcast was sponsored by Otsuka America Pharmaceutical, Inc. The views expressed in this podcast reflect the views of the speakers, not the views of Otsuka America Pharmaceutical Inc. If you liked what you heard today, please make sure to subscribe to the series, share a review, and let others know about it.